Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I would like to thank Thunderbird House for sharing their beautiful space with us this morning. My name is Della Herrera, and I am the Executive Director of Aboriginal Health and Wellness Centre. I'm pleased to be here today with Honourable Sarah Guillemard, Minister of Mental Health and Community Wellness, and Honourable Alan Lagimodiere, Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, for this important announcement. I would like to acknowledge we are gathered on ancestral lands, Treaty 1 territory, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. At this time, I would like to invite Minister Guillemard to the podium to say a few words.
Thank you very much for that, Della, and thank you very much, Elder Aaron. Good morning, everyone. I am Sarah Guillemard, Minister of Mental Health and Community Wellness. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Before I begin, I too would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. I want to offer a very special thank you to Elder Aaron Pierce for the opening prayer and song. Thank you as well to Della Herrera and Noella Gentis of the Aboriginal Health and Wellness Centre and Thunderbird House for hosting us. I appreciate very much all of your important work and for being with us here today. In February, my department launched a pathway to mental health and community wellness, a roadmap for Manitoba, the government's first 5-year plan for improving wellness, mental health, substance use, and addiction services and programs in the province. A strategic focus of this roadmap is Indigenous partnership and wellness. We know that colonialism, racism, and intergenerational trauma resulting from residential schools have impacted the mental health outcomes for Indigenous people in Manitoba. The location and discovery of more than 6,000 unmarked graves of children and youth who attended Indian residential schools across Canada has once again brought to light the significant pain and suffering endured by more than 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children and youth who were forced to attend schools from the late 1800s to the mid-1990s. The legacy of residential schools includes significant intergenerational trauma. The findings of unmarked graves has considerably increased the level of trauma felt by many Indigenous peoples and communities. Today, I am here to announce that Manitoba will be providing $500,000 to 10 Manitoba Indian residential school healing centers, increasing their capacity to provide culturally appropriate mental health and trauma supports to Indigenous residential school survivors. This contribution builds on funding provided last September to support ceremonies, programming, and awareness for the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Providing funding to each of the regional healing centers will allow them to increase their capacity to provide survivors, family members, and communities with mental health and trauma supports during their time of need. Specifically, the funding to the healing centers will allow for an increase in counseling and cultural supports and offer residential school survivors the chance to attend healing events, gatherings, and other educational events or conferences. This investment aligns with the recently launched roadmap and the findings and recommendations within the Virgo report, as well as the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. By supporting these initiatives, Manitoba is acknowledging the past harms and ongoing intergenerational harms caused by residential schools and increasing our response to the needs of residential school survivors as well as their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Guillemard. Now I'd like to invite Minister Lagimodiere to say a few words.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Good morning and Tansei. On behalf of the province of Manitoba, my colleagues, I'm honored to be here today with you. We now know there are potentially over 6,000 unmarked graves of children who attended residential schools across Canada. This tragedy is a grim reminder of the cruel impact that these schools have had and are still having on the lives of survivors, Indigenous children, families, and communities. It is also a reminder that as we work to reconcile our relationships, we must also reconcile with our past. Today, our government announced the Residential Schools Resolution Health Support Program to provide mental health, emotional, and cultural supports to former residential school students and their families. Supports provided by local Indigenous organizations will help former students and their families to safely address issues related to the long-standing pain and negative impacts of residential schools and provide culturally appropriate healing services. Our government is committed to working in partnership with residential school survivors, families, Indigenous leadership and communities, elders and knowledge keepers to support the important and necessary process of truth-telling and healing. It is imperative that we listen, that we learn, and support the healing needed to address the intergenerational trauma caused by the Canadian government's residential school program. Through a combination of new and ongoing initiatives, we will continue to address the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of reconciliation in Manitoba. Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you, Minister Lagimodiere, for those kind words. Now, I would like to say a few words about the We Are Still Here Survivors Legacy Conference, which was held from March 29th to 31st, 2022 at the Victoria Inn in Winnipeg. The focus of this conference was to honor the survivors and families of the Indian residential schools, the Indian day schools, and the 60s Scoop, as well as the victims and families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Through their experience, they leave a legacy of wisdom, courage, strength, and resilience. An average of 600 people attended the conference on each of the 3 days. Those who were there told us that participating in the workshops and sharing stories were very emotional and profound experiences. There are no words to describe the significance of the support that was provided or the bonds that formed among those present. At the closing ceremony, you could feel the healing and hope that was in the room. That being said, these are difficult times and there is much more healing to be done. We have, however, come away from this conference with renewed hope. At this time, we will conclude the formal portion of the announcement. If the media has any question for Minister Guillemard or Minister Lagimodiere, they would be happy to answer them now. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Well, we are very grateful that the Pope took the time to meet with the Indigenous leaders from across Canada, hear their stories, and to do a formal apology to everyone. And I'm looking forward to his visit. He said he's coming to Canada this year. We're looking forward to that. And I hope we'll have the opportunity to meet with him as well.
for the rest of the time? Okay. So today's announcement really is a starting point for investments to help support the survivors of the residential schools. And you start with enhancing the capacity of existing programs that already have those relationships. And we will be in discussions with the Indigenous communities and leaders to find out where other strategic investments can be made to help and support those who are healing from trauma. They're spread out throughout the province, so they already have existing programs that reach out to residential school survivors. So asking what sort of supports they needed to enhance their programs, that's what initiated this investment.
Is $50,000 enough? Or is it
Right. I don't think that there's a number that will ever be enough. That's why this is a starting point. It's not the end point.
Would there be an expansion to other communities as well in the future?
There will be other investments, absolutely, to help support survivors in the future. But today's announcement is on this particular one for $500,000 for these organizations.
These particular organizations?
Right. Right, and again, this is a starting point. There will be more that is invested throughout the next few years, and certainly as my department partners with Indigenous leaders, we will have other programs to support those who are dealing with the trauma of their experiences within the residential schools. But in addition to that, we'll be addressing some of the other ongoing mental health issues that are within not only the Indigenous communities, but within Manitoba. Thank you very much.